There is a bank in the mountains of West Virginia where, for a few decades around 1900, the janitor's job included pushing a wheelbarrow full of cash down a brick street to the train station, because that was simply the easiest way to move the money. The town around that bank had, at one point, as many as 14 millionaires living inside its limits, more per capita than anywhere else in the United States. Today, in that same town, a house that would have belonged to a coal company clerk sells for less than a used pickup truck. That town is the last stop on this list. Today, we're counting down 10 places across West Virginia's coal fields where the boom of a century ago left behind railroad depots, company stores, and entire neighborhoods, and where the bust that followed left behind some of the most affordable real estate anywhere in America. Before we get into it, let's set the terms honestly. Some of these 10 towns are still living communities where you can genuinely buy a house today. Others are preserved as historic sites on National Park Service land, which means you can walk through them, but you cannot own them. I'll tell you clearly which is which every single time, because confusing the two would not be fair to you. And every town on this list, whether you can buy there or not, has a real reason it became this affordable. And I'm going to name that reason honestly instead of just showing you the pretty parts. These towns didn't fade because anything was wrong with the land or the people. They faded because an industry that once employed tens of thousands of families across these hollows shrank, mechanized, and eventually moved on, and the towns built entirely around that industry had no real way to replace what left with them. Real history, real prices where they exist, and real trade-offs. That's the whole point of this channel. If you like this kind of deep dive into the parts of America most people drive past without a second look, go ahead and subscribe, and while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're watching from. I always like knowing who's actually curious about this stuff, and it helps me figure out which regions to dig into next. Number 10 is Quinnamont, a name built from Latin, meaning roughly 5 mountains, which tells you something about the terrain it sits in. Quinnamont sat inside what is now the New River Gorge, and unlike most of the towns on this list, it was never really a mining town itself. It was a trading post, a depot town, the place where goods and coal money moved between the surrounding mines and the outside world. At its peak, it held a few hundred residents and a busy rail junction connecting it to Beckley and Hinton. When the mines it served began closing through the 1940s and 1950s, Quinnamont lost the business that gave it a reason to exist, and the town quietly emptied out. What remains today, protected as part of New River Gorge National Park, includes old rail yard structures, the ruins of an iron furnace, and 2 small churches built side by side. A reminder of how segregated company towns organized daily life even in matters of faith. Quinnamont itself is federal land now, not for sale. But the surrounding Fayette County communities have some of the most affordable listings in the state, with properties regularly available for well under $20,000. The catch here is the same one you'll hear again on this list: no local economy left to speak of, and long drives for anything beyond the basics. It's a quiet, respectful place to start a countdown that only gets more remarkable from here. Number 9 is Kaymoor, and this one is less a town you visit than a mountain you descend into. Between 1900 and 1962, the Kaymoor mine produced close to 17 million tons of coal, one of the most productive operations in the entire New River Gorge. Getting there today means hiking the Kaymoor Trail and then taking a staircase of 821 steps down the mountainside to reach the old mine works, with another 400 steps below that to the railroad level. What makes Kaymoor worth the climb is what the National Park Service has preserved along the way. Original safety signs still bolted to the rock, reminding miners a century ago to check their equipment and work carefully. Kaymoor is entirely federal parkland, so there is nothing to buy here, but it sits inside Fayette County, where nearby unincorporated communities have land and older homes listed well under $10,000. The honest catch is that this is a hike, not a neighborhood. You go to Kaymoor to understand what the work actually looked like, not to imagine living there. And that distinction matters more here than almost anywhere else on this list. Number 8 is Nuttallburg. And this is where one of the more unexpected names in American industry enters the story. British entrepreneur John Nuttall founded this coal camp along the New River in the 1870s. Drawn by coal that burned cleaner and hotter than most, ideal for the emerging steel industry. By the 1920s, Henry Ford had leased Nuttallburg's mines, trying to control every link in the supply chain that fed his River Rouge steel operation outside Detroit. For a few years, coal dug here genuinely ended up inside cars rolling off Ford's assembly lines. Ford sold his interest by 1928, and the mine finally closed for good in 1958. There's a quieter story here, too, worth telling with the respect it deserves. A teenage Carter G. Woodson worked these same mines, along with the ones next door at Kaymoor, to save money for his education, reading newspapers aloud to miners who couldn't read them himself in the evenings. Woodson went on to earn a doctorate from Harvard and later became known as the father of what is now Black History Month. Nuttallburg today is preserved by the National Park Service as one of the most complete coal mining complexes left standing in the country, with its massive conveyor system still visible on the hillside, running from the mine opening down to the tipple by the railroad tracks. Like Kaymoor, it's federal land, not for sale, but Fayette County around it holds some of the cheapest real estate anywhere in West Virginia, with older homes and land regularly listed under $15,000. The catch, as with the last two entries, is that this is a place you visit for the history rather than a neighborhood you move into. Number 7 is Stotesbury, over in Raleigh County, named for a coal company executive the way many of these towns were named for the men who built them. Miners here worked some of the richest seams in the region, and by the 1980s, the mine had become one of the first longwall operations in the area. A more mechanized method that let fewer workers pull more coal from the ground. Production actually continued all the way until 2002, but the surrounding community had thinned out decades earlier. Once mechanization meant the mine no longer needed as many families living close by. What's left in Stotesbury today includes original company houses, aging mining equipment, and 2 churches built for the town's black and white congregations, standing as a quiet record of how these communities were organized. This is one of the few former mining sites on this list where private land is genuinely available, with parcels in Raleigh County regularly listed under $15,000. The catch is that you're buying into a place with almost no remaining infrastructure. Whatever you need day to day, from groceries to a doctor's appointment, you're driving to get it. And that drive is a real part of the cost of living here, even if it never shows up on a listing sheet. Number 6 is Thurmond. And if you want to see just how far a boomtown can fall, this is the clearest example in the entire state. In its prime during the early 1900s, Thurmond's rail depot handled around 95,000 passengers a year on 15 daily trains. And by some accounts, more freight passed through here than through Cincinnati and Richmond combined. There was a bank, hotels, and a notorious 4-story hotel across the river that burned down in 1930 under circumstances still debated by local historians. When railroads switched from steam to diesel power in the 1950s, Thurmond simply stopped being necessary, and the population that had once numbered in the hundreds fell to single digits, where it remains today, officially the least populous incorporated town in West Virginia. About 80% of Thurmond is now owned by the National Park Service, including the restored 1904 depot, which still serves as an Amtrak stop 3 times a week. A small amount of private land does exist around the edges of town and in nearby Fayette County, available at prices most Americans would spend on a used car. The honest catch is isolation on a level most people have never experienced. Limited cell service, no real commercial district, and a 5-person population that constitutes the entire local government. Thurmond is best understood as a place to visit and marvel at, a snapshot of what a boomtown really looked like, rather than a realistic relocation option for most people, which is exactly why it earns a spot on this list instead of a spot on your house hunting shortlist. If you've made it this far, you've probably noticed how much of this history simply isn't taught anywhere outside the region itself. That's really the gap this channel is trying to fill. Subscribing doesn't cost you anything, and it genuinely helps videos like this reach people who are curious about the parts of the country that history books tend to skip past. So if that's you, stick around, because the next 4 towns are where this story gets a lot more personal. Number 5 is Gary in McDowell County, built in 1902 by U.S. Steel as a fully planned company town, complete with schools, churches, medical facilities, and streets laid out in orderly rows through the hollows. Named after Gary, Indiana, another U.S. Steel town, Gary, West Virginia became one of the most productive coal-producing communities in the world at its peak. Coal that helped fuel American industry through much of the 20th century. As mining technology advanced through the 1960s and 1970s, fewer workers were needed to pull more coal, and the population that had once supported this ambitious company town began a decline that never really reversed. McDowell County as a whole has lost roughly 80% of its population since its peak of nearly 99,000 residents in 1950. A decline driven almost entirely by mechanization and the slow retreat of the coal industry. Gary remains an incorporated town today, and real property is genuinely available, with McDowell County homes commonly listed under $30,000 and land parcels available for a fraction of that. The catch is real and significant. This is one of the poorest counties in the country, with limited grocery access, a stretched local economy, and genuine distance between you and most everyday services. But Gary is also a real place, with neighbors, a church community, and a history that still shapes how people here think about work and family, and that matters just as much as the price tag does. Number 4 is Welch, the county seat of McDowell County, and the town where a young senator from Massachusetts stood in 1960 and told an uncomfortable truth out loud. John F. Kennedy campaigned here during the West Virginia primary and spoke directly about the hardship he'd seen in these hollows, hardship that helped shape the food assistance policies that followed his election, with McDowell County among the very first places in the country to receive them. Welch had been, not long before that, one of the wealthiest coal-producing regions on Earth, and Kennedy's visit marked a turning point in how the nation talked about places like it. The decades since haven't been easy on Welch. Its last big-box retailer closed in 2016, and the town has worked hard to hold on to what infrastructure it has left. But Welch is very much a living town today, with a courthouse, a downtown, and a real housing market, where McDowell County listings commonly fall under $50,000, some considerably lower. The catch, stated plainly, is that this is a community still working through decades of economic transition, with a smaller tax base and fewer services than it once had. You're not moving to Welch for a booming job market. You're moving here because you understand what the low price is actually paying for, and because there is something meaningful about living in a place that a president once stood in and promised the country would not forget. Number 3 is Coalwood, also in McDowell County. And this one carries a story a lot of people already know without realizing where it's from. Coalwood is the real coal camp behind Homer Hickham's memoir Rocket Boys, later adapted into the film October Sky, about a teenager who built homemade rockets while his father worked the mine below town. What the film doesn't show you is what Coalwood looks like today. A small, quiet community of company houses, many still standing, tucked into a hollow that once organized its entire daily rhythm around the mine whistle. Coalwood's population has fallen sharply since its mid-century peak, following the same pattern as its McDowell County neighbors, but the town retains a genuine sense of identity, helped along by visitors who come specifically because of the book and film. Homes here, when they come up for sale, track with the rest of the county, often listed well under $50,000. The catch is one you've heard several times already on this list. Thin local economy, limited services, and a level of quiet that some people find restorative and others find isolating. Coalwood asks you to know which one you are before you commit, but for readers of the book or fans of the film, there's something genuinely moving about standing in the actual hollow where that story happened. Number 2 is the broader stretch of small McDowell County communities like North Fork, Keystone, and Kimball, former coal camps that once housed thousands of families working mines up and down these hollows. None of these are large towns today. Some barely register as towns at all anymore, but they remain genuinely part of the county's housing market, with some of the least expensive real estate anywhere in the country. Recent county sales data shows homes changing hands for prices that would barely cover a security deposit in most American cities, occasionally in the low 5 figures for a livable house on its own lot. These communities carry real history. Coal camps that supported one of the most productive coal fields on the planet for the better part of a century. The honest catch is that you are buying into communities that have lost the vast majority of their population, and in many cases, most of their local commerce along with it. This is about as close as it gets to buying directly into the raw, unfiltered version of Appalachian coal history, without a museum sign or a park ranger explaining it to you, which is either the most appealing or the most intimidating thing about this entry, depending entirely on who you are. And that brings us to number 1, Bramwell. At the turn of the 20th century, Bramwell, West Virginia, population around 4,000, held the highest concentration of millionaires per capita of any town in the country. As many as 14 of them at once, mostly coal barons who made their fortunes off the extraordinarily rich Pocahontas coal field nearby. The Bank of Bramwell became so flush with coal money that its janitor, a man named Henry Wade, regularly wheeled bags of cash down the town's brick streets to the train depot for transfer. A detail so vivid that locals still repeat it more than a century later. Those coal barons built Victorian and Tudor mansions along Main Street, several of which still stand today, restored and open to the public during seasonal home tours. The Great Depression hit Bramwell hard. The bank closed in the early 1930s, though remarkably it eventually repaid every depositor in full over the following decades, and many of the families who built this town's wealth moved on or lost their fortunes entirely. What remains today is a small, proud town of a few hundred residents, working hard to preserve its remarkable architecture through a historic district, a coal heritage museum, and twice-yearly home tours that draw visitors from well outside the region. Housing in and around Bramwell in Mercer County is genuinely affordable, with nearby listings commonly available in the $20,000 to $60,000 range, homes that once would have housed the household staff of the millionaires up the street. Here's the honest catch, because Bramwell has earned an honest one. This is a very small town with a correspondingly small job market. mostly built around heritage tourism rather than year-round industry. You'll be driving to Bluefield or further for most services, and while the architecture here is remarkable, some of these homes are well over a century old and come with the maintenance needs that go along with that. What you're really buying in Bramwell is proximity to one of the most improbable true stories in American economic history. A town of wheelbarrows full of cash that quietly became a town where a house costs less than most people's annual grocery bill. None of these 10 places stayed this affordable by accident. Every one of them paid for its low prices with a mine that closed, a railroad that stopped needing steam, or a company that decided it no longer needed the town it had built. That's the honest thread running through almost all of Appalachia's cheapest real estate, and it's worth sitting with rather than glossing over. These towns aren't hidden gems waiting patiently to be discovered. They're communities that have lived through a hard, complicated transition and are still living through it in ways that happen to leave real opportunity behind for people willing to trade convenience and career options for space, history, and a mortgage payment that barely registers by national standards. The people who choose towns like these aren't chasing a bargain for its own sake. They're choosing a slower, quieter version of life in a landscape with more history packed into it than almost anywhere else in the country. And for the right person, that trade has been worth it for generations. So tell me, out of these 10, which one would you actually consider? And if you're from West Virginia or know these hollows better than we do, tell us what we missed in the comments. Because nobody tells this story better than the people who grew up living it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.